Hello, it's Wednesday, August 2nd, 2017. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO Headline News. The moon and the ringed planet Saturn pair up together at nightfall. In the same vicinity of the sky, you can note another bright celestial beauty, that ruddy star Antares, the brightest star in the constellation Scorpius, the Scorpion. The writer of our article here, Bruce McClure for earthsky.org, and he says, clouded out tonight? Not to worry, watch for them tomorrow night as well. Saturn and Antares are bright. They both exhibit that first magnitude brightness. But you can distinguish between these two celestial luminaries by color. Saturn displays a golden hue, and Antares, as we know, has that ruddy complexion. If it's hard for you to discern the color, try using a pair of binoculars if you can get your hands on them, and that way you can see Saturn and Antares a little closer. Better yet, try a telescope. Oh, devoutly to be sought. You can view Saturn's glorious rings, even with a modest backyard variety. Did you know that as seen from Earth, the orientation of Saturn's rings appears to shift regularly over time? We did not know that. This happens as we orbit the Sun yearly, while Saturn orbits once every 29.5 years. This year, 2017, as we gaze across space to Saturn, we are seeing the north face of Saturn's rings. These rings are inclined at 27 degrees toward the Earth this year, which is about as wide open as they ever appear to us from our world. We see the north face of the rings for about 15 years and 9 months, and then the south face for about 13 years and 9 months. That difference, the 2 years, is due to Saturn's eccentric orbit, with the planet traveling most swiftly at its perihelion and more slowly at its aphelion. The north side of Saturn's rings will open up most fully October 26th, 2017. At that point, they'll exhibit that maximum inclination of 27 degrees. Thereafter, the inclination of Saturn's rings will slowly but surely diminish until the rings appear edge-on. That's going to happen in 2025. Mark your calendar. At this juncture, Saturn's rings will appear invisible to earthly observers for about a month and a half. That's because the rings are so thin in contrast to their width. Backwards in time, the astronomer Christian Huygens, or Higgins, some pronounce it that way, it's spelled Huygens, in 1629 to 1695, had an explanation for the periodic disappearance of Saturn's rings in something he titled Systema Saturnium. That was published in 1659. If you're into the look of old writings, old papers, there's an incredible graphic that accompanies this story. You can find a link to it later at ufoheadlinenews.com. It shows you a page from Huygens' Systema Saturnium. It's cool. The bottom line, on August 2nd, 2017, use the moon to locate the ringed planet Saturn as darkness falls. Miss 'em tonight? Try again tomorrow night. And speaking of going back in time, well, it is Way Back Wednesday. So coming up is part 2 of the alien shot dead by military police. Don't go away. But now let's talk about Proxima b. It's another article from earthsky.org, written by Deborah Bird. Interestingly enough, this article has 2 headlines we found. One is An Earth-like Atmosphere for Proxima b, but the other one is No Earth-like Atmosphere for Proxima b. So let's see how this works out. Here's the story. In August 2016, when scientists announced the discovery of a planet orbiting the nearest known star, Proxima Centauri, people got excited. That's largely because it's not just any planet. It's a planet similar to size in Earth, orbiting in its star's habitable zone, that Goldilocks zone, where everything is just right. At 4.2 light years, or 25 trillion miles to Earth, Proxima b is vastly too far away to be explored in our lifetimes, although that hasn't stopped dreamers and visionaries like the folks at Breakthrough Initiatives. They're devising plans to explore this. Still, theoretical studies are the order of the day for Proxima b. A recent one suggests that Proxima b, quote, may not be able to keep a grip on its atmosphere, leaving the surface exposed to harmful stellar radiation and reducing its potential for habitability. End quotes. The habitable zone to astronomers means the potential for liquid water to exist on a planet's surface. Life, as we know it, needs water. But an atmosphere is another essential ingredient for life. The team statement said this, quote, "Having the right atmosphere allows for climate regulation, the maintenance of a water-friendly surface pressure, and shielding from hazardous space weather, and in addition, the housing of life's chemical building blocks." End quotes. This new computer model, which was part of a NASA study, was published July 24, 2017, in the peer-reviewed astrophysical journal Letters, considered what would happen if Earth orbited Proxima Centauri. The study suggests Earth's atmosphere wouldn't survive in such close proximity to Proxima, which is an active red dwarf star that emits high-energy, extreme ultraviolet radiation. This radiation has the potential to ionize gases in a planet's atmosphere. That is, it knocks electrons off atoms and produces a swath of electrically charged particles. In this process, the newly formed electrons gain enough energy that they can readily escape a planet's gravity and race out of the atmosphere. On Earth, this clearly isn't happening, but our sun is a more sedate star than Proxima. Catherine Garcia Sage, a space scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, she and her colleagues used a computer model for Earth's atmosphere, magnetic field, and gravity as proxies for Proxima b. They also calculated how much radiation Proxima Centauri produces on average, based on observations gathered from NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory. In Proxima Centauri's habitable zone, Proxima b encounters bouts of extreme ultraviolet radiation hundreds of times greater than Earth does from the sun. That radiation generates enough energy to strip away not just the lightest molecules, hydrogen for instance, but also, over time, heavier elements such as oxygen and nitrogen. A space scientist at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell, Ofer Cohen, co-author of the study, said this, quote, "The question is, how much of the atmosphere is lost, and how quickly does this process occur? If we estimate that time, we can calculate how long it takes the atmosphere to completely escape and compare that to the planet's lifetime," end quotes. The model shows Proxima Centauri's powerful radiation drains the Earth-like atmosphere as much as 10,000 times faster than what happens on Earth. Here's how Garcia Sage explains it. Quote, "This was a simple calculation based on average activity from the host star. It doesn't consider variations like extreme heating in the star's atmosphere or violent stellar disturbances to the exoplanet's magnetic field. Things that we would expect provide even more ionizing radiation and atmospheric escape. At its orbital distance from its star, Proxima Centauri, the exoplanet Proxima b, nearest known exoplanet to Earth, likely could not sustain an Earth-like atmosphere, and this is according to this new theoretical study." Jeremy Drake, an astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, co-author of this study, said, quote, "Things can get interesting if an exoplanet holds on to its atmosphere, but Proxima b's atmospheric loss rates here are so high that habitability is implausible. This questions the habitability of planets around such red dwarfs in general," end quotes. So here's the bottom line. Proxima b is the nearest known exoplanet, and it orbits in its star's habitable zone. But a new study suggests it might not be able to hold on to its atmosphere long enough for life to develop. Let's see what's been developing over at UFOstalker.com, shall we? Here's a UFO sighting from Green Valley Lake, California. It's MUFON case number 85463. The date of the sighting is the 26th of July this year. It was reported July 29th. Here's the summary. Took pics of unusual pink and blue-laced clouds. Later saw blue long object. First picture breaks into 4 or 5 blue objects. Second picture, object ascended in seconds. There are photographs, obviously, submitted with this account, and you can find them later for your own analysis at ufoheadlinenews.com. The viewing distance here was 501 feet, eventually 1 mile. The altitude was over 500 feet, and at the time, over Green Valley Lake, California, there was cloud cover. The sighting duration, 1 minute. Object features, unknown. Object flight path, likewise unknown. This object was shaped like a cylinder. The temperature at the time in California, Green Valley Lake, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees Celsius, down to a minimum of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. The minimum, maximum, mean visibility all stacked up the same, 10 miles, 16 kilometers. And there wasn't anything abnormal about the weather. However, it was something not normal. Here we go. I was walking and praying on a Forest Service road near my home in San Bernardino Mountains. I was approximately 19 miles west of Big Bear Lake. The elevation there is approximately 7,000 feet. I looked up and noticed a beautiful pink and blue-laced swirling cloud formation. I took 2 pictures with my iPhone. At that time, I didn't see anything unusual. But later, while viewing these pictures, I noticed a blue, cigar-shaped object. From the first to the second picture, this object ascended. At that point, it broke into 4 or 5 objects of the same color, but different shapes. I have never seen anything like it before. We have had some intermittent monsoonal clouds this past week, but this particular day was warm, sunny, and the skies were mostly clear. Very interesting. Walking and praying. Well, could that be a possible candidate for that basket marked conscious contact? We leave it for your decision, gentle listeners. Now let's stay in the state of California, but travel about 440 miles north, a slight jog west. Oh, if you know the way to San Jose, it's right about there. It's a city called Concord, California, and it's the next sighting up. MoveOn has given it a case number for tracking and ID purposes. That number, 85512. The date of this sighting is July 30th this year, and it got a same-day report. The summary, floating and following. Yikes. The sighting specifics include a viewing distance quite close, 21 to 100 feet. The altitude is described as landed and treetop. The sighting duration, 5 minutes. This object features simply get that description of unknown. Its flight path was a straight line path, and then other. And this object was shaped like a sphere. Here's the account, first person. I was taking a video of the night sky to hopefully catch a shooting star. After I started recording, I went inside for something to drink, and when I returned, I noticed something floating down on my camera screen. I looked up to confirm that what I'd seen on the screen was really there. It was definitely there, almost floating down, changing shapes. And then it disappeared after it landed. A few minutes later, I looked up, and I saw another one moving in from west to east. Right behind it was something with a solid white light, following that second object. And then they both went out of my sightline over the trees. I'm uploading 2 different videos of this. One is raw footage, and the other is edited to try to clear it up a bit. However, gentle listeners, don't bother to look for that video. There was either a glitch in the matrix or gremlins in the pipeline somewhere. There's even a comment here after this submission from the submitter. It's someone called Mike, and he says, "Why did they not post my video?" Well, all we can say is check out ufostalker.com. Maybe somebody has corrected this issue. Alrighty then, it's Way Back Wednesday. Here is part 2 of our story, Alien Being Shot Dead by MPs, January 18th, 1978. This features the military complexes at Fort Dix and Fort McGuire. In years to come, they would be combined, but at that time they were 2 separate entities, more or less. And just the recap here, during the early morning hours of January 18th, 1978, UFOs were sighted flying over Fort Dix and Fort McGuire Air Force Base. They were adjacent military bases. Shortly afterwards, an Air Force security patrol was ordered to go to the back gate of McGuire Air Force Base. They needed to allow entry to...
At Hackensack Meridian Health, we believe the best health care is perfectly orchestrated. Researchers working with doctors to treat the most complex conditions. Specialists identifying problems sooner. And everything you need, from primary care to emergency care, home health to rehab, is all perfectly in tune. Here, when everyone works together, your world gets better. Hackensack Meridian Health. Life years ahead.
New Jersey State Police. They were searching for something. One of the airmen on duty at that time was our hero here, Sergeant Jeff Morse. Nope, not his real name. The state trooper from New Jersey State Police told Morse that a Fort Dix MP military police had been pursuing a low-flying object that had hovered over his car, and then a small being with a large head and slender body appeared in front of his car. The MP had panicked. He'd shot that alien several times with a .45 automatic. The being fled over the fence between the two bases before falling, dying on the deserted runway. Chaos ensued. The usual cover-up troops were brought in. These troops also wore blue berets, which were a feature of these military bases, but the faces were not familiar to Morse or the others, and they seem to have arrived at the scene awfully quickly. There is suggestion they were on the base all the time. Later that day, a team from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base arrived in a C-141 cargo aircraft, crated up the body, loaded it on board, and took off. Morse and his companion were warned not to talk about the incident, or they would be court-martialed. 2 days later, Morse and other participants were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio, where they underwent intimidating interrogation and were again warned not to talk about the incident. We left off last week with Morse, not his real name, being ushered into a room for that examination. As you recall, the setting was sparse. Wright-Patterson, like that of a court-martial room, is how it's described. A table and chairs in an unadorned room, and we're picturing just very dirty windows for some reason, a dark atmosphere. Here is how Jeff Morse describes it. Quote, "While we were there, we were all together, except for actual interrogations. My interrogation had 2 men, one apparently a civilian with a pipe and beard who never spoke. At one point there were 3 men. One played nice guy, one mean guy, and of course that silent civilian. All they wanted to know was the nature of the incident, what I knew, and then they told me about my duty to keep my mouth shut. I signed a form, and it is supposed to bind me for life," end quotes. Never once, as Morse recalls, did any of the interrogators offer information, no explanation of this incident. Nor did anyone ever refer to the retrieved dead body, which had been crated up and removed, or suggest that it might have been of extraterrestrial origin. Said Morse, "They beat around the bush. All the references to it were indirect," end quotes. The day after the interrogation, Morse returned to McGuire, was debriefed by his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel F.M., and released for normal duty. This incident, he said, was not discussed again by anyone. It was as though it had never happened. Here's the latest information. The last section of this information is compiled by Leonard Springfield and Richard Hall. The former Air Force security policeman who claims to have witnessed a UFO incident on January 18, 1978, involving military police at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey, and adjacent Fort Dix, and New Jersey State Police, recently visited the Washington, D.C. area from overseas, where he's employed, and he met with the authors of this report, Springfield and Hall. The Fund for UFO Research, an organization, sponsored a mini-conference to bring Springfield from Cincinnati, Ohio, and have representatives of the fund meet with the witness as to allow them to form their own impressions of his credibility. That mini-conference took place on January 24, 1987, at a large shopping mall in the Washington, D.C. area suburbs. In addition to authors Hall and Springfield and Jeff Morse, not his real name, our witness, there was Dr. Bruce S. Maccabee, chairman of the fund, a big name, really well-respected researcher, and William H. Hall, electronics engineer, brother of Richard Hall, were in attendance. Also present was Dr. John B. Carlson from the University of Maryland, an astronomer, and a fund board member was to have been present, but a postponement caused a reschedule and a conflict. He was out of town on the date of that conference. William Hall, a former technical consultant to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, we call them NICAP, substituted, since he had a number of things in common with Jeff Morse, including a military police background and overseas duty stations. It was felt he would have the ability to judge Jeff Morse's credibility as he talked about his activities. By prior arrangement, Jeff Morse remained incognito, using only his first name. But he talked freely and responded to questions by Bruce Maccabee and William Hall. The authors of this article, by the way, do know his full name, his employment status, his past biography, etc. During this questioning and review of the alleged incident, Morse filled in details that were missing from his previous account, but nothing he offered was startling or new. A number of questions were clarified, and some new information, including claims that can be checked and proved or disproved, were offered. However, Hall and Springfield again were impressed by Morse's straightforwardness, his lack of embellishment. The most significant new information, related by Morse briefly, was his claim that on a trip to the United States to visit his family in October of 1986, he had been detained while in California under obscure pretenses. Outraged, he filed a lawsuit against the California-based authority and notified Springfield by letter that he would return to the United States in January 1987 for court appearances, and that at that time he would be willing to meet with Springfield and Dick Hall and a couple of well-trusted other friends to discuss this matter. But, as it turned out, during Morse's layover in the States, he could learn nothing about the cause or the reason for this California detainment, nor the identity of the source who dictated the pick up and hold order. All of his legal probes, for some inexplicable reason, had been stalled in that tangle of red tape. Among other things discussed at this mini-conference was the entire question of alleged harassment of UFO crash retrieval witnesses, apparently in an attempt to intimidate them into silence. If Jeff Morse's story is credible, he is potentially an important witness who would tend to undermine any official cover-up. And unfortunately, this makes him vulnerable to retaliation, which may account for this detainment. It inhibits his ability to lead a normal life. Skepticism about crash retrieval reports may be fully justified and entirely understandable on the part of UFO believers and disbelievers alike, unless they've met Jeff Morse or one of his many counterparts face to face. Jeff Morse has now provided many additional leads that the authors of this article are intending to check, and they will report those findings. Meanwhile, the authenticity of the incident report form from Morse, the one he supplied to Springfield, and that's reproduced, by the way, in the MUFON 1985 UFO Symposium proceedings. It was obtained from a colleague still on active duty, and it's been disputed by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, on the grounds that the style and terminology used allegedly does not follow proper Air Force style, and therefore is probably a hoax. One of the key statements made by AFOSI was that pay grades E2 and E3 were given, instead of ranks as corporal and sergeant, on this official form. Aside from the fact that Morse had claimed all along this was a rough draft, a backroom copy subject to review and revision, and that minor errors would be corrected by responsible officials before the final report was filed, this Air Force Office of Special Investigation statement is inaccurate. Pay grades rather than ranks are routinely filed in official Air Force reports. Participants of the mini-conference discussed ways of obtaining additional information about this incident and various initiatives are being undertaken to do so. Mind you, this is a few years ago. We haven't heard much lately. But as a result of this mini-conference, there are 2 additional persons, Bruce Maccabee and William Hall. They've met now. They've talked with Jeff Morse personally. They can confirm that he is not a, quote, fairy tale, end quotes. He's not a figment of the imagination. And they're now in a position to help confirm or disconfirm his story. There are official documents relating to this incident. There's a link that you can find later at ufoheadlinenews.com. Thanks again, a tip of the hat to our man in the High Castle for this concept of this story for Way Back Wednesday. If you'd like, sleuth around. We're sure there might be pieces, bits that you can find that we just couldn't. It's something to occupy one's time. Speaking of time, we've got to fly because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network. Follow us on iTunes, iHeartRadio, ufoheadlinenews.com. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you tomorrow.
Okay, keep your eyes closed.
Okay.
I want to show you my first ever painting.
All right.
Okay. Open your eyes.
Oh, that's a lot of colors and shapes.
So be honest. What do you think?
Well, I like how if you switch to Geico, you could save hundreds of dollars on car insurance.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Here, why don't I hold your paintbrush while you call them?
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.